Welcome back to Way of the Wrench, and I've got an exciting video for you today. We are going to be mounting the playfield today, and we're going to design it so that we can actually get it to hinge up for service access, and we are also going to make it so that it can come right out of the cabinet in case you need even more room. This can be one of the trickiest things for this entire build, so hopefully today's video will help you guys out. Let's go. So first up, the location and the angle of your playfield monitor should really be already figured out. That's kind of something that happens in the design process or in your SketchUp drawings. If you need help with that, I will post a link to the video above so you can figure that out for yourself. Now, for me, on my design plans, I want the front of the playfield monitor basically 3 inches from the front of the cab. I want it almost pretty much touching there. Could go a little bit less. I think I got about 1/4 inch to spare. And then at the back of the monitor, I want it to be down roughly 4 inches, and that way it still has the angle that looks appropriate for the ball to roll around, and I have roughly 4 inches back here to put in my LED matrix, which I want to put in later. So those are my numbers, but like I said, once you figure out yours, you can move on to the next part. And keep in mind, once you have your playfield mount installed, there's still some adjustability for the monitor to go front and back to be able to mesh with your apron if you had to make up some space there, or right against the edge of your lockdown bar, which is what I'm going to be doing. Now, left and right, there's not going to be that much room because hopefully you've designed the inside of your cabinet to mesh with the outside dimensions of your monitor. If not, you'll have a little bit of room there to center it. But the next thing we need to know is from the top of the monitor to the bottom of the monitor, plus the thickness of whatever your mount you're going to use, we need that number so we can actually start laying it out on the inside of the cab. So let's go figure that out. So off camera, I've already pre-cut my playfield mount, and what I'm deciding to use is 1/2 inch thick plywood. I don't go much thinner than 1/2 inch, probably 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch plywood, and I cut it the length of the playfield monitor, and then I measured the width of the cabinet, and I took away 1/4 inch. So that leaves me 1/8 inch on either side, so that when we tilt this up and down, it's not scraping up the paint of the inside of the cabinet. Now, keep in mind, I am making this full size now to make it easier for me for laying out VESA mount holes and all that stuff. And when I'm done, I can choose where I want to lighten it or add ventilating holes or cut it away so that it's not going to scrape the sides, etc. So this is a good starting point. Now, you don't have to use this plywood. You essentially just need a base or a mount for your playfield monitor that is going to be strong enough and not flexing. But you could do this a different way where you use solid wood, use some scrap 2x4 stuff, and you're going to need 2 pretty big strips this way, probably something at least 1 inch by 1 inch, maybe even 2 inch by 1 inch. So 2 strips so that you have enough meat for the strength of the VESA mount bolts. And then you probably have to have a strip going this way for the front stopper blocks and one for the back for the actual pivot hinge that I'm going to show you. So there is other ways of doing this. However, I'm going to do it this way because I think this is the easiest to start with and easiest to show. And once you get it all working, you can also just narrow it down and lighten it up. So now we need to get the monitor on here and make some measurements for the overall height for the monitor, including this mount material. Before you get too carried away and start mounting your playfield monitor, you have to take a look at your VESA mounts and make sure that they are all the same height, which they generally are, but worth a check. And then also the height of that VESA mount, does it conflict with anything else on the back of the monitor, especially since we've decased it. So for my example, the original VESA height actually starts hitting all the components here on the computer boards, and most notably this little kind of coax cable here. Now, I'm not going to use that, but rather than grind it down and possibly damage something here, all I got to do is put some spacers on each of the VESA mounts and make sure they're all the same so that I can mount it a little bit further and give clearance to everything here. So what I've got is I've got a couple of washers in here, and I have taped them all down so that they don't fall out when I do the next process. The other thing you need to figure out before you mount this is which way is the bottom and which way is going to be the front of the cabinet on the monitor itself. So on my monitor, this is the bottom, so it's going to go to the left-hand side of the pinball cabinet when you're standing at the front, and then this has to go to the front. That way everything is oriented properly when we start it up on the computer. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to flip over the playfield monitor and place it on top of the mounting board. And then we're going to get a ruler and measure from the top of the monitor down to the board and make sure that all 4 corners are the same. That way we know it's sitting flat on our VESA mounts and that the board itself is flat. Then what we're going to do is measure from the top of the monitor to the very bottom of the mounting board, and then that dimension is going to get added to the depth of where we want the monitor in the cabinet, and that's going to give us a line that we can put either by pencil or use some masking tape or painter's tape to make a line for where we have to attach the stop blocks and the back pivot mounts for this playfield. For me, from the top of the monitor to the bottom of the mount is 3 1/4 inches. All right, looking at the inside left edge of the cabinet, remember my design plan was for the front of the playfield monitor to be basically flush with this, and then the edge or the front edge of the TV was going to line up with the back edge of my lockdown bar. So I was planning on making a custom lockdown bar that was 3 inches wide, so I have measured from the front and made a mark at 3 inches. And because I want the monitor to be flush with this, then I have to measure with my new measurement that we just did for the playfield TV and its mount, which was 3 1/4 inches. So I basically just measured down and made a line at 3 1/4 inches deep. Now this line is where the stop blocks need to be for the playfield monitor when it comes and sits down on it. So now let's lay out the back of the cabinet. Now the length of my TV is 42.5 inches, so I've basically lined up the 42.5 at the first mark, 3 inches in from the front, and then made a mark for roughly where the end of the TV is here. Then take your tape measure and lock it so that you can hang it, and it kind of acts like a plumb bob. Hang it so that the edge lines up with that pencil mark you just drew for the length, and let the tape measure kind of hang where it needs to. And because I wanted the back of the playfield monitor to be 4 inches lower, I have to add 4 inches plus the 3 1/4. So 7 1/4 inches is where I need to make a mark on this side at the back. Now that you have the front and the back stop block locations, we need a line to represent where our playfield monitor is going to be. So get yourself a long, flat, straight stick, like a meter stick, and make a nice line. Or if you have painter's tape, masking tape, you can take a long piece, pull it nice and tight, and that makes a really nice straight line, and then just line it up with your marks. Once you've done the one side, make sure you do the other side as well. Now that we have a line for where the bottom of our mounting board is going to be, we now have some more accurate kind of measurements that we can make to double check that we are not going to have anything interfere with our buttons or our plunger. So let's take a measurement off of the playfield monitor and mount. Now with my monitor and board selection, if I measure right from the bottom to the first thing that might interfere with anything like buttons, I am getting 1 3/4 inches. So now I can go check that out the cabinet, see if anything's going to hit. Now with the flipper and MagnaSave buttons in here, remember the TV is going to go pretty close to the side of the cabinet here, but it does not start interfering with anything until 1 3/4 inches from the bottom here. So 1 3/4 inches puts us right there. So we're going to have some clearance like that, and that's well away from those flipper buttons and MagnaSave buttons. So we don't have to worry about that. And then with the plunger and the analog sensor tube installed in here, roughly where it would be, you can see that it's even lower than the buttons. And even though it's about 2 inches out, there is a little bit of a dip in the TV where it dips down a bit more, like 1/8 of an inch. We're still going to be clearing easy, something like this. So there is no issues with the plunger in here as well. Now that we know the playfield monitor is going to sit here and not interfere with any of the buttons or plungers, we still have the playfield mount underneath that is going to hit everything there, because the underside of that is trying to get down to where that tape line is, where our stop blocks are going to be, and it's going to hit everything here. So the suggestion that MGR Net suggests is about 4 or 5 inches from the end of the playfield mount. You're going to cut out a notch in the corner here on the front, left and right, so that you can clear all that stuff and it not be in the way. Now, I'm kind of thinking you could also probably just cut back 4 or 5 inches and just go straight across, but for right now, we're just going to do the notches as suggested and then see if we need that space up at the front. If we don't, we can always trim it off later. So let's lay that out. From the start of my playfield mounting board, I'm going to cut it back this way 7 inches, and then I'm going to go, give myself some room, go 4 inches. So 7 by 4 inches. There you can see lots of clearance there for that to get down where it needs to sit. Cool, on to the next thing. Time to make those stop blocks for the front and the back of the mounting board for the playfield. So go find yourself some scrap 2x4 material. This happens to be leftovers from the angled piece from the last video I did. And the reason why I picked it is it's 1 1/8 inches thick. So I want it kind of thick this way because it's going to get screwed to the sides of the cabinet. And this is where the playfield mount board is going to sit against and stop. So if it gets too skinny, like anything less than 3/4 of an inch, you're kind of asking a lot from it. And then I probably only make it about 4 inches long. And this is, I think, just a touch over 3 inches. So let's make these, and then when we're done, we're going to pop probably 4 screws in here, and maybe a counter bore in there so we can get 4 screws to go into the side of the cabinet where we want that to stop. Now that we have our front stopper blocks, let's lay out 4 holes and drill them just big enough for these screws to drop in. Now, taking a look at your monitor mount where you put the corner cutout, measure out to where the cutoff stops and where this stop block is going to need to be. And then we're going to position the top surface of this stop block in line with the top surface of the tape and the line that you made for where the cutoff is. And we're going to install these screws. Now, I would recommend just installing them just a touch and then take them immediately out, and then we can pre-drill the holes in the cabinet so we're not splitting any wood. So the front stop blocks are in, and it looks like it's going to work perfectly for us. So now it's moving on to the back pivot blocks. In order to figure out where I want this pivot, I want to put the playfield monitor board down in here, but there's nothing holding it back here. So what I've done is I've gone to the trunk of my car and grabbed one of these temporary scissor jacks. You can spit it up to whatever height you want, and these are really good for figuring out what angle you want. And then once you get to the right height, just put it back here, and then we can lay in that board and figure out where our pivot's going to go. Now, right now, this playfield board extends kind of a little bit under a couple of inches, which we can always trim off after. But what I'm more concerned about is kind of where this part is in relation to straight down on this playfield monitor. So basically just going to stick a ruler here and make a mark on both sides. And then that's basically right where the playfield is underneath there. Now, to figure out where that pivot is going to be, you kind of have to think about where the TV is going to hit here. So we have to have the thickness of the TV plus the thickness of the board, and that's 3 1/4 inches, in case you didn't remember. And that's with it hitting. So if we want a little bit of clearance, then we even need a little more, so maybe 1/2 inch or even 3/4 inch on top of that. So probably somewhere around 4 inches. From this line is where the pivot should be. Now the other thing that pivot point affects is if this pivot point is too far forward, you're going to end up with more of this board going down into the cabinet, which may not be a big deal for you, but if you've got things like computers or subwoofer boxes and things under there, you have to watch that you're not going to be hitting those. And if you go too far back, then you run the risk of having the monitor touching somewhere at the back box. Now, I'm assuming that even if you had this absolutely perfect, you're still going to have this kind of hit at one point, so you're just going to have to play with your cabinet design to get what you want. Now for the pivot material itself, you're going to go to your local hardware store and you're going to look for round wooden doweling. This one here is 1 5/16 inch diameter, and then more importantly you need to find some round conduit strapping. This one's actually 1 inch, and make sure that they fit nice and snug together. So for me, 1 inch conduit fits perfectly and flush back here on 1 inch and 5/16 inch diameter. Next step, I'm going to measure the inside of the cab and cut this down about 1/4 inch less than that, so there's a little bit of play so that when I bring out the playfield monitor, it's not going to scrape up the sides. Okay, this is the line here that we just drew that was right underneath the back box, and we need to add the thickness of the TV plus the thickness of this board, and then at least 1/2 inch. So 3 1/4, why don't we just round it up to 4 inches from this mark out is where this should be for the pivot. Now the way this is going to work is I've got those other stop blocks that I made. This is going to get a hole drilled right here, and then 2 lines from the tangent cut out so that this would basically just drop in. So kind of simulated like that. Now if we have it like this on both sides, this would lock it in place, because if we strap this to the board, this would sink in and drop and sit on that stop block. But the problem is every time we went to tilt up the playfield, this block's going to be in the way. So the way we're going to get around that is we have to make another cutout on the back corners so that we can clear this. So I'll basically just take a measurement. Looks like it's going to be probably about 9 inches from the end, and then if I make it 2 inches from the sides here, that'll probably be enough to clear the block. So let's make these cutouts. Next up is we have to lay out and drill a hole for the wood dowel to be able to go through our stop block. Now I want this right in the center, so you can measure and make a center line in your piece. And then take half the diameter of the wooden dowel that you're doing and make a line from the bottom, and where those intersect is where you're going to center punch and drill with a hole saw to fit this. Now in my case, I happen to pick the 1 5/16 diameter, and they don't make that as a hole saw, or at least I couldn't get it at my local hardware store. So in my kit that I have, I've got 1 3/8 inch. Be a little bit bigger, but if it's too big and too sloppy and I'm not happy about it, we can always wrap some tape, electrical tape around here just to kind of take up that slop. Here's the game plan to put this hinge on accurately and straight so it hinges nice and straight and not crooked and wonky. So, flipped over this board, I need to make the hinge line or the pivot line 6 1/4 inches out. Now, this is going to be kind of awkward to kind of screw in and have it where I need it. So what I've decided is I'm going to get a piece of scrap wood that has a nice clean edge on here. And if I take half the measurement of the dowel and minus that from the 6 1/4, that leaves me with 5 inches and 9/16. So if I make a nice line there at 5 inches and 9/16, I can put this up against that line and put 2 C-clamps. And then I have a stopper block for this to go right back and be exactly where it needs to be and nice and square. And then while I'm holding that, I can position these where I want, away from the edge so there's lots of strength. Lay out where those holes are going to be, center punch and drill those after, and then put in the screws. And then when I unclamp this thing will be square and perfectly where it needs to be. And since I had 3 of these in the conduits, I'll put one right in the middle and do that one as well. It just turned out nice and strong and looks very straight to me. So before I snug these up to their final torque, all I'm going to do is take a ruler and measure from both ends and make sure that the equal amount is sticking out. And once it's even, lock it down for good. Once you've got your pivot blocks ready to be installed, I recommend that you get your playfield mount exactly how you want it. So starting at the front point where you measured, adjust that scissor jack from underneath to get the right height for the back, and take some measurements accurately from one point from the left and right to make sure that this isn't sitting crooked. And a good guideline is the top of the dowel should be pretty close to the top of your masking tape. Now when this is ready to go, from the back access panel from behind, you're going to lay your pivot block up against the dowel and then position this with the flush line of the tape. That should be pretty much where it is. Now to figure out where these screws are going to get pre-drilled after, we're going to tighten one screw to hold this position, or if you can hold it by hand with one screw, take another screw and just push in on those locations. And then when you take the stop block, we have accurate spots where this is going to be, where we can pre-drill the screws so we're not tearing any wood out. And then once you got one side done, do the other side. Yeah, that looks great. Perfect. All right, cool. Playfield mount is installed and working beautifully. Now, if you've been following my series, you will know that I'm a very picky guy. And when I specified that I wanted a 1/4 inch clearance between the playfield mounting board and the sides of the cabinet and for the dowels, that was so that we could remove this in the future without scratching up the paint on the way out. However, that means that when it's installed and in its place, there is some slop or some play. about 1/4 of an inch, and I'm not really happy with that. So what I'm going to do, it's actually a quite simple fix, is just above the stop blocks, we're going to add some blocks with some tapers, so it doesn't inhibit how this is going to go in. It actually will kind of make it smooth in. And when it sits down on the stop block, the clearance will be taken up only right where it's touching. And same thing with the dowel pins. We'll add something in there in the stop pivot block so that it takes up that slop. The next step is getting the monitor centered in exactly where you want in the cabinet. But how the heck do you transfer these exact VESA mount locations into the board underneath the cabinet when it's all set up where you want it? Well, there's a trick to that. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab the bolts that we're going to use for the VESA mount, and you're going to get a piece of paper. Now, you could just take pieces of letter size paper and tape them together to make a longer, bigger piece, but I really do recommend you just go to the dollar store, get yourself a rather large piece of just a slightly thicker cardstock. That way this doesn't tear while you're trying to do this and make it more frustrating. And then what you're going to do is find where your VESA mounts are, poke a little hole right in the center, and put in one of your bolts just to stop the paper from moving. And then pull it a little tight as you find where the next VESA mount is. Do the same thing, poke a hole, put the bolt in, pull it tight this way, and put all 4 VESA mount bolts in. And then what you're going to do is to hold this location while you flip it over and put it back into the cabinet, is you're going to go to the edges of the paper and tape it down somewhat tight so this is all where it needs to be. This is also a really good time to lay out any kind of power cord access holes or anything that's going to be hitting, or any kind of ventilation. You can lay it out on the paper and it'll be exactly where it is in the cabinet. And then I'll show you, once we get this in the cabinet, what we got to do. Here's where you are finally placing the final position for your monitor. So get it centered this way so there's space between the monitor and the side of the cabinet when you go up and down. Get it exactly where you want it, front to back. And then when it's exactly where you want it, what you're going to do is you're going to peel the tape off the front strips and the back strips so that you have released it from the TV, and you are going to tape it down to the board on the front and the back in the same position, because the TV is literally just sitting on it. And then once you have that taped, you can remove the monitor, and those holes that we just put in the VESA mounts are going to show us exactly where we have to drill for the mount on this. time to install the bolts into your VESA mount. Now, whether you're using a socket, a ratchet, or some wrenches, make them snug, but don't go crazy tight with them so that you're stripping out the threads in the mount. And then the other thing is the length of the bolt you pick. Make sure it's not too long and that you're actually tightening it right into the monitor and permanently damaging this thing. So let's get these installed. All right, cool, let's give this a test. Now, when you go to lift this up, do not lift from the monitor. You have to open up your coin door, get underneath and push it up, and then you can get the playfield lifted up from the bottom. Now, on mine, this goes all the way up and self-support, so that's pretty cool. And it just hits the corner of the monitor on the angled piece on the back box. And there's a good 1/2 inch, 3/4 of inch clearance on everything else at the back, so that's awesome. And the one thing that happened off camera that I thought is worth mentioning is that even though I had a little bit of slop and room for the TV in there, which I kind of thought was maybe a bit excessive, by the time this all got together, it was still rubbing and hitting on the hinge bolt for the back box because it sticks out about 3-4 millimeters. So what I had to do is lay this back down, loosen these bolts, and shove the monitor over as far as it could with the play allowed from the bolt to the hole on these VESA mounts, retighten, and now it is just barely clearing that. So I'm glad I had that clearance. Now, the next thing is figuring out how to keep this up safely so we can work in here without getting absolutely clobbered as it falls down. So traditionally what they do is they have some kind of stay that goes in here. It's kind of basically 2 blocks and either a piece of wood or a piece of angle iron, something to act as a brace to prevent this from coming back. So easiest way to do that is go look for some scrap pieces of wood, and you kind of have to just play with the design. Depends on everyone's cabinet what you're wanting, but ultimately it can't be sitting up here. It's got to be hidden underneath when this playfield goes down. But imagine it's something like this where it's got a pivot point, and when you want to use it, it would pivot up like that, and there would be a block or something here, and this would prevent it from falling down. So I think I'm going to use some angle iron that I have, some aluminum angle iron, and design something like that. And I will probably design it with a couple washers so that this isn't sitting right on the playfield and scraping it up every time I use it. It can be away a couple millimeters. Now, just a quick note, if you were not wanting to do those hood stays, you could also do another method where you have some kind of strapping system that would bolt to the bottom of the playfield mount and strap up to the top of the back box and have some way securely of attaching it to the back box. So maybe drilling a hole and installing a T-nut from underneath if you were to take off some of this trim and do that. And that way you could basically take a screw out, flip the strap back up, make sure the strap's pretty decent, you know, like maybe like a luggage strap or a big heavy piece of leather. And then with a hole in it or with like a grommet, you could put the bolt back into the hole on that end and that would secure that up out of the way. It's not a bad idea, especially since you're not going to see the top. And then that would give you even more access here and no stays to deal with. So there you go. This is how I designed my stay, but keep in mind that this is supporting almost zero weight. It is just preventing it from moving forward because all the weight is on the dowel and the pivot blocks. So if your design happens to not go far back and it's leaning out forward, then you're going to have to design this a little bit more skookum to be able to hold on to that weight. All right, the playfield monitor is now installed and the video is getting very long, so I'm going to be cutting it right there, even though I teased you guys saying that I would be putting in the PC and getting this all turned on and showing you what it would look like. So that'll have to be the next video. Speaking of which, I think the next video is going to be getting this basic function going. So installing that Virtual Pin plunger kit, getting the buttons working, plunger going, some audio, and see what this thing looks like. So look forward to that. Or I might take something completely different and start looking at how to make a do-it-yourself lockdown bar, which I know a lot of you are looking forward to. And I've got some surprises there. I think I might do a non-welded version for people that don't have any welders and a more authentic, professional-looking welded version for people that do have welders. So look forward to those ones. If you have any questions or concerns about the build, or if you're building your own and you want some help, go ahead and put some comments down below and I will get back to you as soon as possible. And if you haven't already, why don't you join us on Instagram? That way you can see all the pictures and stuff behind the scenes that's going on in the shop in between videos. Till next time, take it easy.